then create the infrastructure for the plans that we're now seeing coming forward. So it is kind of exciting,
It's very exciting,
for the
yeah.
district, because that's just been sitting there. There's been a lot of talk over the years, and finally it has the ability to move forward.
Right.
Board members have comments this evening? We're coming up, this is our last board meeting before before the opening of school, so Dr. Kender?
We have big donations tonight. I don't know if, no, they're not up there. If you looked, the first one is really interesting. All schools district-wide, the GE Additive Education Program in technology, estimated cost $129,700. Says it's going to provide each school. Now, is that each school or just the high schools? I don't know the prices. Every school? Polar 3D and XYZ 3D printers, an online resource, $129,700. Bowles PTO is providing monetary $2,700 donation to reimburse of field trips taken during 2016 and 2017. Donation, Chesterfield Elementary, $7,519 to improve one-to-one Chromebook ratio, 27 Chromebooks with warranty and OS license. Crestview PTO, monetary, $9,739. Reimburse expenses as agreed for gifts from CPO, which would be the Crestview parent organization. Reimburse the school for new cafeteria tables, replacement lobby furniture, new hallway benches, outdoor benches, replacement microwave carts for students' use in the cafeteria, and 8th grade celebration items. Those are really nice. And I hope people get a chance to see that if they watch this, if they go through the agenda. Really nice.
Appreciate you pointing those out. Those will be part of the consent agenda items, but good thing to go through those. Thank you. Any other board member comments? All right, we'll move on to the consent agenda items. I need a motion to approve the consent agenda items as submitted.
Moved.
Have a motion and a second. Any discussion of those consent agenda items?
Go through them again.
Would you? You could. In that case, all those in favor,
No.
please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. That carries. Thank you. The regular agenda items, we need a motion that policy and regulation 0342 nepotism, conflict of interest, and financial disclosure be readopted as submitted.
Moved.
Second. Have a motion and a second. I got to tell you, when I went through that, there's not a whole lot of change. Lisa, can you help us understand what?
She's taking a seat. Obviously, we know this is driven by statute, one of those where we don't bring this through a pin. The board agreed to that a few years ago. We probably maybe would cover that tonight when we talk about the protocols. But this is just one of those that really we're required to do, and Lisa has guided us through that.
Right, and you are correct. It looks like a lot of changes to the regulation in particular, but there is not. It's mostly in just trying to make it more readable, and we added some more of the language from the actual statute into the regulation. There's only two substantive changes. One is that we added the law change so that adopted relatives are treated the same as blood relatives. So you've got that on your chart. And then up here in section 2 and 3, the limit in the statute changed to $5,000 a year that triggers those things. So those are the two changes in substance. And I don't know if any of you, do you want me to summarize your requirements a little bit, or are you going to do that later, or I can just answer questions?
I think the board has had it to look at. I think if
Right.
they have questions or if they'd like you to summarize any part of it, that'd be okay, but we're probably good.
It's pretty straightforward. I was mainly surprised when I was reading through it that I read it and went, well, you didn't change anything, but I guess there are the limitation changes they're relatively minor.
Bottom line is we abide by all statutes relative to, no pun intended, relative to nepotism.
Yeah, and I guess I would just want to remind the board that if there is a question, certainly the Missouri Ethics Commission, monitors these. Ask that you can call them anytime. If you're not clear about something, certainly you can always ask me too. But and then you do have another policy, 0311, which has some of your general requirements in it that refers to the conflict of interest provisions also. So just be aware of that if you're looking at this topic.
The motion is to readopt the policy and regulation 0342. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. That carries. Thank you. The next item is, hope I'm not skipping one here. No. The motion to approve the appointment of Todd Minichelio, Coordinator for the K-12 Guidance and Counseling, as the official liaison to the National Collegiate Athletic Association for the 17-18 school year. We have a motion and a second. Thank you. Any questions about it? Lisa, you want to tell us anything about this?
It's just our annual update of, we have to name a liaison to serve.
We use Todd instead of the district athletic director because they're dealing with the NCAA, which the counselors work with. Is that right?
It's also has to do a lot with college eligibility, and so being that he's out.
Yeah.
All right, any questions or comments on this? The motion is to approve Todd as the coordinator for the NCAA for the 2017-18 school year. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. That carries. Thank you. And we're going to get to some of the board issues now. The next one is a motion to approve the Board of Education meeting calendar for August through December of 18 and January through July of 19. I think they would call that the 18-19 school year, but I need a motion to approve the meeting dates for that period.
Moved.
Motion and second. The dates are all listed there in 18 and 19. It seems like a long ways away. Per the policy 0410, we set these out a year in advance. Of course, any meeting date is movable by the board's discretion, but take a look through those if there's any that you would like to move to another thing. And one of the things we're going to talk about in a little bit when we talk about board practices is meeting dates and frequency for board meetings. So if indeed the board wishes to, they could change those in the future. Any discussion about these dates as they're laid out as they are? All right, the motion is to approve these dates for the 18-19 school year. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. Great, thank you. Next, we have a bond issue purchases and related contracts over $150,000. I need a motion to approve the bond issue purchase and related contracts over $150,000 from W. Schiller and Company, otherwise known as Schillers, for an increase of the existing contract.
Moved. Second.
A motion and a second. Debbie, tell us about this one.
Schillers began with the construction projects for the high schools, and because they had been involved in that, we wanted to extend their participation in the project to see it through, instead of changing in midstream. So,
One available to put up there? It was not sure where that was.
this is
There
actually
we are.
for,
Okay.
because we had exceeded our contract amount, so we had to go out for an extension.
The whole thing's about $730,000.
We've had a lot of smart boards and projectors
Yeah.
go in this year, as well as in the regular schools. And then with the new construction, we're adding actually some more than we even anticipated, because you were able to do the alternate plans as well.
Okay, budget-wise on that?
Yes.
This is under the existing contract, it's just an extension of the dollar amount?
Yes.
Okay. Schiller's has been doing a good job?
Yes.
Their reputation is very good.
Yes.
So,
They've
good,
done an excellent.
good.
What's the average lifespan of a smart board these days?
We have some smart boards that are almost 15 years old. So they last anywhere from about 5 to 15 years. The 15-year-old ones are starting to need to be replaced. The projectors are a little bit shorter lifespan. We have had to put quite a few new projectors in this year that were in the 5 to 7-year age range.
When you say replaced, is that because they're wearing out or because technology has surpassed where they are?
So when they wear out, it's usually cheaper if they break. Other than just a light bulb replacement, it's cheaper to replace the projector than to repair it.
Are the projectors basically the same they were 15 years ago, or they keep
No,
modifying?
they do have new features. We have wireless connectivity in some of them, so teachers can connect without a cable. We have different brightnesses than we had before. I'm kind of drawing a blank on some of the other features, but it depends. We have some interactive projectors that actually eliminate the need for a board, which are going in the STEM rooms.
We'll get the most up-to-date one.
Yes. Yeah, we're getting.
How does the cost compare to what they used to be?
Actually, for just a plain projector, they're about the same or less. For the interactive projectors that do away with the board requirement, they're comparable to the price of a board, of an interactive board like a smart board, and the projector cost.
Balances out.
Yeah, it's about the same.
The improvement in functionality is incredible.
It is
They really have come a
incredible.
long way.
And
sorry.
just the brightness and the clarity in the display.
I was going to ask a similar question. So what is on the horizon? What's the next generation of technology that you would see for the classrooms?
Wow.
You don't have to answer that question tonight.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't expecting that question. I came prepared for projectors and screens for the constructive.
But is that a consideration
better.
as trying to plan
It
for the
is,
future?
it is, and we actually are looking more at interactive type projectors. There are display panels out there that eliminate the need for a projector altogether. So there are a lot of different things out there that we'll be evaluating, I'm sure, over the next 12 to 15 months.
I've seen a presentation that goes a little beyond that, which I think when you may have been specific to what smart boards are doing, but just the world of virtual reality and I mean that is going. I mean it's in the classroom to some degree, you know, but that's going to become an unbelievable thing for classrooms in the future. I mean, kids are going to be able to go anywhere in the world from right there in their classroom, and the things that they'll be able to see and do and how we can engage that into the curriculum and the teaching will just be phenomenal.
Professional learning that goes along. Okay.
Years ahead, yes, yeah. Our instructional tech teachers and our technology support staff are already starting to look at those things and plan.
Discussion or questions? All right, the motion is to approve the bond issue purchase from Schiller for the contract for the smart boards. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. Thank you. That carries. The next item we're going to get to, usually it's last, but let's go ahead and look at the agenda for the August 17th board meeting. Pull that up briefly and we'll take a look. These are the things, that'll be the day after the first day of school. So I'm sure everybody will be,
Lee's birthday.
right?
After my
And Laura Lee will be 32 and 1 day old. So that's good. Those are the things on the agenda right now for the next board meeting. One of the things we're going to talk about in board practices is how those get scheduled and reviewed and those kind of things. So if anybody has any changes or questions, changes or questions they'd like to make to that agenda, you still have about a week to do that. We can bring those up. So that was just a discussion item. We don't need to do anything more about that. Let's go ahead and I think everybody has it their spot there, a paper clipped thing with 3 things in it. One is the board practices and procedures. And the next one is the code of ethics. And the last one is the strategic focus area 5 of our comprehensive school improvement plan. I asked Jan to bring those with us. One, I hope everybody had a chance to look through the board practices and procedures. There's about 7 items on there, and the other 2 things will come up during the course of that. This is an open, free discussion. We, as a board, can decide any of these things we want to do. I'll talk a little bit about why we did it the certain way we did in the past and what the reasons for that were. But certainly nothing locks us into any specific thing. This board can decide how we're going to function, how we're going to schedule meetings, and how we'll go about those procedures. So right now, it's a very open discussion. If anybody wants to say, no, that's dumb, let's do it a different way, hopefully you'll phrase it better than that, but that's the idea. First of all, board meetings. What we've done for a long time is we've done them on Thursday nights. We do them starting with a Closed session at 6, sometimes a little earlier if we have some work shop things to get through. Generally, we go immediately into closed session. We hold that for an hour, take care of legal issues and the other things that are statutorily acceptable for closed sessions. Then we come back out and starting a few years ago, everybody look up and smile. We've recorded all of these board meetings for anyone online. They can hear them, they can see them, they can watch them live. I don't know that we get a tremendous amount of viewership on that. It depends on what's going on in the community, but there's times when people have come to us and said, that thank you for that transparency. And I would recommend, though we don't have to, everything's open, but I would recommend we continue to record them both audibly and visually and present them out there.
Do we track the hits that we get on those?
Kathy
we
can
do.
tell you all about that.
We usually talk about those statistics when we have our COPE meetings. So we talk about, was there a spike? Sometimes Kathy always brings all that stuff, so it's interesting to see that.
We do it about twice a month, every other Thursday. Times are those, the frequency is that. The location we have recently, within the last year or so, moved into this location for a couple of reasons. One is it's more central in the district. More importantly, in my mind, is that we're no longer disrupting a middle school to do it. This building is a very old one. It was originally Eureka High School back before many of us were around. But it's turned out to be a very good facility for this. So at this time, I guess I would open it up. Is everybody happy with the meeting times, the dates, the locations? I know 4 times a year we make it out to the high schools for the awards. That's fairly new over the last couple of years, and I think that's worked out very well as also not a lot of attendance for the meeting, but you actually make it out to the 4 quadrants and see the schools and people come in and they get a little better attendance at the awards. So, any discussion about the meeting dates, locations, frequencies?
You had talked about possibility of eliminating some of the dates.
Didn't mean, my only intention was to say that we can do, or we can fail to, or we can refrain from doing anything the board wants to do.
Okay, so I didn't just dream that up. You said,
Yeah, we can, if the meetings are too frequent, we could cut them down. Even in the summer when we don't generally have a meeting, generally, if nothing else, the district has to pay its bills, and we have to get together every other week to do that. Sometimes that ends up in a rather short agenda, not very often, but sometimes it does. But the frequency tends to work out pretty well as far as doing the district's business, but that could be adapted if we wanted to do something a little differently. It seems like it works pretty well the way it is.
we could also have the possibility of, if some stuff can be moved forward, maybe cancel a meeting or two.
We've done our fair share of that, and I think that's there's good and bad about setting meetings out so far in advance. But we really haven't had any problem. I mean, there's been conflicts. I mean, we've talked about a conflict this coming year with the MSBA. We made a change there. We made another change back in, I think it was March, because of my attendance at the national conference. So I think it's a good shell that you approve in advance, but there's always that ability to adjust along the way.
Lost you close to holidays or?
He can't hear you. Can you go just a little bit closer to the thing?
Thank you. The one date I would suggest looking at, and I don't have the calendar in front of me, is maybe the December date, if it falls fairly close to the holidays or the whatever, so.
We try to be conscious of that, and we have 2 meetings, and then we also have to think about the meeting when we come back in January. So, yeah, this one's on the 20th, but it's 6 1/2 dozen the other. If you push it far to where it's right before, our district really doesn't shut down. I mean, per se, a lot of people are gone. But if you push it far, then you don't have to have one right on the heels of coming back. So, but it's always you're good to point that out, because it's always a little bit of a trick in December and also in March. spring break.
This year, our last board meeting is on December 21st, which is a Thursday, and the last day of school is the next day for the holiday. So it is just before the end of the month, and the one before that's on the 7th. So it seems like they do watch for that. All right, the next item is agenda setting. We have generally what we've done in the past is that the superintendent, the board president, and no more than 2 others can get together and talk about the agenda for the following meeting. That meeting hasn't been happening all that often recently. We do review the agenda. The idea is not to hash over the merits or the decision of those agenda items, but rather to set what's going to come up on the agenda. Do we have all the background information? Is there anything else that we should put on that agenda? And that happens on Wednesday, a week and a day, 9 days before the board meeting. Any board member is welcome to attend that. While it's not been happening fairly recently, anybody else that'd express interest in it, but I would renew that invitation tonight, that if anybody else would like to sit through those, generally it's a matter of going through the agenda. If there's any explanation of what is that, where'd that come from, why are we doing that, and not a what should we do about it, but why is it on the agenda. Any board member is welcome to attend that. In the absence of other board members, generally we look through them. We go through all the financial statements. If there's anything in there, and we don't get together to do it. We do it on the phone and look through the items that are on there. If I go through and see anything that looks, and there's never anything in the financial items that you go, oh my gosh, what are you thinking? But rather matter, you're going to need some further explanation on that. So it's a matter of kind of going through them and then deciding, is there anything more? And sometimes I look at something and go, I just don't understand where that came from, and kind of come to the conclusion that if I don't understand it, probably somebody else won't either. So anyway, those meetings are open. We can reinstate those more formally and have other board members attend them. We would generally do that here at the headquarters or up the street at the headquarters. Any interest in those? Any for the timing of those? Generally about a week out gives time for if anything needs to be researched, anything needs to be changed or anything like that. So the timing's pretty good of it about a week before. We could just continue the way they are and continue the invitation, or we could change that to a more formal arrangement. I don't know if anybody's...
I would continue the invitation, and particularly I know as an incoming new board member,
Sure.
and I've been trying to get there, that just to understand the process.
Sure. Right. Well, again, we'll leave those on tentatively scheduled for the Wednesday, which is 9 days before it. If we're going to get together in person, it's about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and we could move that timing somewhat. Many years ago, it was done over lunch, but some people can do that, some people can't. When it comes to timing for submitting items, I think statutorily we are limited to 24 hours before. Is that right, Lisa? So you can't change the agenda 24 hours before the meeting. That prevents boards from doing tricky stuff like 2 hours before the meeting deciding it's going to be in Aruba or someplace. But in practicality, what we try and do is that same 9 days out. If we're going to change the agenda, and at any time if something comes up, and especially if there's an event either in the news or in our schools or something else, we can change the agenda up to 24 hours before the meeting. And if we need to, we can schedule a special meeting that happens, to take care of those things. But in general, for regular run-of-the-mill things, if we can get that agenda kind of nailed down 9 days ahead of time, that works best for everybody. It gives the staff over at the central building time to do a thorough job of that. So,
Do you guys decide if you're meeting in person or not?
generally, lately, and this is my fault, starting a new job is a little hard for me,
Right.
and
No, I
I'm
get it.
way, I'm like 100 miles away. So it's been harder, and we have not been meeting in person. But we could make that happen anytime that somebody's interested in it. And it's not even absolutely, I don't have to be there, as long as there's board members that want to talk about it.
A lot of times it's, to cut Matt a little slack here, he's blaming himself, but really our agendas have been, there's been nothing complicated to really discuss about what we're bringing forward. I think that's the good side of scheduling the number of meetings we do, that, every once in a while I have a hot topic, but there's not a real trick to putting these agendas together, because we keep them spread out nicely, so they're light generally. And there just hasn't been, honestly, when Matt and I communicate about meeting, we never get around to talking about that you're out of town, because we have been talking about how there's not really a need to meet, and that really determines that. So,
And Eric, you've been really good about notifying me that, like, we're not meeting, we're doing it by
Right.
phone, so that I know not to drive out here. And
yeah,
do it.
it's good, and I give Janet credit for that, because she's always making sure that you all know to let her know if you're even thinking about attending. So then if Matt and I decide that there's not a need to meet, then I can let you know. So,
Well, even if the two of us decide there's not a need to meet, if a board member wants to
Yeah.
sit down and look through the agenda ahead of time, that's a reason to meet.
absolutely.
So if somebody has a desire to do it or wants to, or even just says, I'd like to see it, wants just to see what goes into it, that's all fair game. So all any board member has to do is request it, and we'll have that meeting.
There were concerns at one time that we weren't getting the agenda items at the proper time, and that needed to be corrected. I don't see any situations ever come up anymore where that's a problem at all. We get the agenda almost a week ahead, and if there's things that's not filled in, you give us a date when it will be filled in. Usually that's budgetary situations or personnel situations. So I think, unless you guys have anything to say, I think it's pretty good the way it's working right now.
Well, we'll continue that invitation then, and as I said, even if Dr. Canosa and I decide that we don't need to get together between the two of us, any other board member that wants to is a good reason to do it. So don't feel shy about saying, I would like to see it once, or I'd like to know about a certain agenda item. Please bring it up. All right, board communications. This one came up a few years ago. Just in kind of how we're going to answer, if someone sends an email or a letter addressed to the whole board, and that often happens, especially by email, but occasionally we'll all get the same written letter within a day of the same, or two of the same time. It's usually a helpful thing, and a lot of times you don't know that because they're very careful about not showing that it was addressed to the whole board, but to an individual board member. If something comes to the whole board, generally we'll kind of acknowledge that everybody got it. And as a matter of course, the president of the board would work up a response and then review that with everybody and then send it back to that person. The exception to that is if somebody sends an email in and says, when does the winter holiday start? Well, that's just a fact. We really don't need to discuss that unless they're saying, can we change it? But if they're just asking, what is it? Generally, that doesn't even, someone in the administration can answer that question. It's just asking what it is. If somebody comes to an individual board member, and sometimes that happens because they know you personally, or you're in their school, or they happen to run into you or something like that, feel free to answer that yourself. No board member is restricted from answering anything. When something comes to the whole board, the danger is that if all 7 of us take it on ourselves to answer the question, and if it's something that's a little bit controversial, we might end up contradicting each other, and that's probably not healthy for the district. But if it's addressed to you as an individual, if it's something that really needs to be brought up to the administration's attention, I would ask you to please confer with Dr. Canosta about that. Find out what the facts are before answering. And sometimes somebody that calls in doesn't have all the facts, and they're wondering why the heck you're doing something a certain way. And when you tell them, well, it's because of X, Y, and Z, they go, oh, I didn't know that. So try and get all the right facts before you send it back. No board member is restricted from responding to anything. You may answer any questions. It does us all a service as a group, though, if we're kind of on the same page, if we know what we're saying, and if you get all the right answers before you do it. It's come up once or twice that we've had a sharing of responses and ongoing communications. This comes out, and I guess the bad word for the bad phrase would be having a board meeting via email, and that's a no-no. If all 7 of us are on an email string, and if what we're doing, going back and forth saying, hey, how'd you like the flowers blooming today? That's fine. That's not district business. You can do that all we want. We can get together. We're not restricted. But if we're talking about substantive issues about the schedule of the school or something controversial going in, and we're all answering back and forth on emails, that's a board meeting. And so if once or twice in the last few years, that's kind of gotten close to that happening, and we've kind of shut it down. And I think once or twice that's come across with the board members as being a little bit rude as far as saying, this has to stop. If that happens and one of us comes by and says, this has to stop, it's because of that. If we're going to have a board meeting, let's get together as a group and let's have that conversation. And if it's something particularly urgent where we need to do it right away, the statutes allow for that. We can call a board meeting that's not on the regular agenda with 24 hours notice and get together. But that's not usually the case. Usually it's just a matter of people are somewhat lightheartedly just chatting back and forth. But I would ask everybody to be conscious of that. If all 7 or if 4 or more of us are on that string and we're all answering back and forth and we're talking about the schools, that's a board meeting. So we have to avoid doing that.
Also suggest that sometimes instead of us even getting together and discussing it, send it to Eric and let Eric decide. He may have already taken care of it. I'm not talking about the flowers, but some other stuff. He may have already decided on that stuff, and he can fill each one of us in.
It'd be helpful.
I may have taken care of the flowers. It's, happens. If I could just interject something that Matt said that's It's also somewhat of a piece down in number 6 in the bullet about interaction with district personnel. But to Matt's example of if you have a question, it's helpful to me if those do come through me, because then I make sure that I'm aware of what somebody's asking about, and my staff has a lot on their minds and their plates, and a lot of times they assume, if they're interacting with a board member, they assume that I know, but it's best if it comes through me, and I may very well tell you to turn around and, do you mind just calling, Paul, to ask him that for me, because he'll have that answer. But at least I know then that somebody's been inquiring, and I know who that person is in case I encounter them or something like that. So it's just a good way to make sure that those through lines of communication stay. They're always intentionally, good in what we do, but sometimes unintentionally, if we break that loop a little bit, it can be challenging sometimes.
We had this has been a couple of years since it first came up. There's a mobile app that the district runs, and one of the functions of that app is that anyone in the district can ask the Board of Education a question by hitting that app, and they can type in whatever question they have. What happens to those questions is what came up a while ago. In the last 12 months, I don't recall even one. So the question that came up is, if that just goes to the board president, how does the rest of the board know about it? And what I said to everybody at the time is that if I get a question that asks something factual, again, a simple response is that, it's on this date, whatever that might be. You just answer the question. If you get a response or a question that's a little more pointed, that asks about, why did the board decide to do a certain thing? Well, then I would explain why the board decided that, but I would copy the entire board so that they knew that came up. And then the question was, should the entire board get that question if it came up? And at the time, most of the board decided that, unless it's something they really wanted to know about, they don't need their mailbox jammed full of stuff. But I got to tell you, in the last year, there hasn't even been one. There actually was one because they tested it, and I got the test. But it really doesn't come up. It's if that becomes an issue where it starts. But at this point, since there are almost none, if we'd like, we could change it so the entire board gets those. I don't know that there's any. The concern was that in the digital age, those might become a little overwhelming, but it certainly has not. Quite the opposite.
Cause you a problem if you send all 7 numbers?
No, as long as that's a transmission to the 7, that's fine. But if it becomes an interactive discussion, that's not. But certainly we can send out informative, just like we can to anybody else. You can send out an informative email. I got this email, going to respond like this. And then if somebody wants to respond, respond to that person, not to the entire board. So we could do one of two things. We could leave it the way it is, where only the president of the board, should anyone ever send one, gets it, or we could have it sent to the entire board. We were concerned that it might become a nuisance for the entire board. It has not. Like I said, in the last year, I don't think it's happened at all. Through the president, and then if we,
That'd be my directive.
whoever that is, and then I said, if it's something that comes up that's of a more pointed nature, we can get that out to everybody and make sure everybody knows about it. And I would hope that I or anybody else in that spot would do that. On the other hand, we're
Would help avoid a forum.
right,
It's through
right,
you.
right.
You know whether or not of the whole board.
Okay. And right now, if I got one of them, the fact that one came through would be news enough that I would tell you about it. So, all right. COPE committee. We've had this going for about 3 or 4 years. I guess I would turn that over. Who's currently on the COPE committee? Okay. So the 3 of you, any comments about, are we still getting good use of that? We have these are the 3 members. Any topics, anything the board can do to make that more useful?
Yes. I honestly can't remember the name, what COPE stands for, because oh, that's right. I was the one who did that. I just couldn't remember it. Communications Outreach and Public Engagement Committee.
Yeah.
This was developed, probably maybe our 2nd or 3rd year, Matt, on the board, which is about 4.5 years ago, when we were getting ready for bond elections, and are possibly some things that came across to the board, where instead of just throwing it to the board, we would talk about it. We wouldn't solve it. That's not the purpose, but to try to figure out what's the best vehicle to get this to the public and to the Board of Education, so that it can be discussed in a manner such that it doesn't cause a frenzy or a big blow up. And we had a regular agenda, we had agenda for a long time, and it was pretty heavy there for a while. Recently, there hasn't been much of an agenda, and that's a plus. And we really haven't had to meet yet because of that. And I'm looking at Kathy, because Kathy's the one that organizes that. And I say, I would think let's keep the COPE committee, but we may not need to meet for 6 months. We may need to meet tomorrow. Well, not tomorrow, but next week. Kathy and Eric are very good about if there's something they need to share with us or just need to bounce off of us, that's fine. You know, they'll let us know. Remember, we do not make any decision. We're just a listening committee, and we can give input, but we're not saying do it that way. Our input is more of how do we get this information out, how do we let everybody know.
There are a lot of things that the COPE committee has done in the past. Talk about bond issues. When we talked about moving meetings, we're really the ones that kind of facilitated that and got the ball rolling, I guess. Yes, professional development. So we had an ongoing list of things. So, and it really started because when you first get on the board, you always think like this place should be full of 100 people every time you have a board meeting, and then you realize that people only come when they're upset. So the fact that a few people are here is a good thing, but that means you're doing your job. But that was one of the reasons why we got together too. We thought how, getting into the schools for those board awards, that's kind of what we talked about as well too. So you're right, Dr. Kinder. It's kind of, we don't have as many things going on, but there's always things you can talk about. The app.
Yeah, I think we tried
talked
to
about the app.
anticipate
Yep.
things that could possibly come up, either awards we're hearing or people in the community telling us, out and see how we basically can recommend to the board to handle it.
There currently a set schedule of meetings?
No, I don't think any scheduled.
I think we met 3 times last year.
Some of us did. Somebody didn't show up to one of them, but the rest of us did. No,
And
yeah.
this year it's
No,
Lisa, Randy?
The committee came into being at a time when there was not very good communication with the community, to be honest, and the committee was a result of that. I think a couple of things have kind of undercut, but have made that less pressing than it used to be. One is that the communications department is doing a very good job, and you see a lot of good communication, and I would kudos to Kathy and your group for doing that. The other one is that Dr. Knos is doing a much better job about getting out to the community, having evenings where people can come and ask any question they like. I think it might be helpful on some of those evenings. I think that at times it's very important for everybody to be one-on-one with the superintendent, get to know Dr. Knos, and he's very personal and good at doing that. But if the COPE committee were to be there at the time as well, and just after the meeting say there's several board members here, if anybody wants to talk to one, here's your chance. That also is a good way to, and later on say, when they say, well, the board's not accessible to anybody, we can say, well, we're accessible at these times. You're welcome to come to any board meeting, and at these evenings, the COPE committee is there, and so you can come talk to any board member. And in addition, all of us have published emails and phone numbers, so I would continually put out that the idea that the board is accessible. But the COPE committee, one of the functions might be on an evening like that to be available, not as part of the presentation, but as part of a, at the end, say, Dr. Knos could say, several board members are here. If you want to talk to them, feel free. One's over there, one's over there, one's over there. So that might be something they could do that, again, there was a dying need for it, a very pressing need when it came into being, and happily that need has kind of dwindled a little bit. I would be careful of not being too complacent with that and still try and make sure that the board is very accessible to the public. And I think that was one of the things that was aimed at for that. So, okay. Board member professional development. Again, this one came up, especially new board members are in need of information regarding district financing and the Sunshine Law. Those are the two that most easily jump up and kind of bite you if you're not paying attention. I think we've done a pretty good job this year of bringing in the CFO, and Lisa's joined us a few times about the Sunshine Law and what those are and what the do's and don'ts are, and more than just the rules, the reason behind it. Why those things are more than just a rule, they're a good idea. We've been scheduling those a couple of times a year. Those topics, or any other topics that we want to bring up that we could schedule. Sometimes we do that as a workshop, and we start an hour earlier at 5 o'clock if there's something that we want to get a more in-depth information about it. Sometimes we just schedule it as a board meeting agenda item and can do that. So I don't know if anybody had any pre-thought about that, about topics. I would recommend that we continue doing the district financing and the sunshine law, because they just, especially as you turn over new board members, and that happens every year, those are the topics that people need to know about. But if there are anything else like trends in education, trends in technology, trends in terms of what's going on nationally and how that's affecting the community as a whole, any of those topics would be very good ones to think about. And I guess unless somebody has one now, I would invite everybody to kind of jot down right there, think about those topics, because we can schedule those. And as a board, I think that makes us more effective if we're gathering the kind of information we need and more attuned to what's going on. So kind of the opposite of the COPE committee. This is us learning about what's going on in the community rather than us being available. So those are two sides of the same coin.
A couple years ago, we had maybe one presentation each board meeting. One board meeting, there's take some time, Lisa would come in and talk about the sunshine law, and then Tim Rooney, or now Paul, would come in and talk about district financing, or Dan, and maybe even technology with Debbie Kettering. But now that was jogged my memory, COPE used to help set those things up.
So I would invite everybody to think about that. That leads right into the next item there, timing of the district calendar. It would be very helpful as we get into a new year now, and maybe Paul can help us do that in one of the meetings, to come in and talk about the annual budget and what happens when, in making this up. And in September, we get the first draft, and in October, we refine it, and in December, I think as the board goes through that, especially again with new board members, understanding what happens at what point during the year, and then finally, we approve the budget in May or June, and that's what's going to be written in stone for the year that starts in July. There is an annual process to that. There's a specific timelines and deadlines as to what we do when. And I think that would be a very helpful presentation as far as calendars go for us to understand what that was. So Paul, if you could do that for us, maybe at one of the future meetings, that would be helpful. Great, thank you.
I've already got you set up for that because you walked me through it once already.
So good.
He's got the PowerPoint already.
And it does help the board members do it, but also it's a very public discussion of what we're doing. And it's not just they brought us a budget in May and we said, yep. It's a more of a review. We go through it and the board is paying attention to it. So it's a helpful thing for the board. It's also helpful for everybody to know that the board is doing it.
I think it will also be important, given the success of the proposition, to have some good knowledge about how that money is being spent, and the innovation rooms, the building. I think that's pretty routine. But some of those other things that might slip by us is to have a lot of knowledge, and even some background knowledge as far as the philosophy and where we're going and impact on students and things like that.
It's like the architect's rendering of what it's going to look like the new building. And I'm still not sure what the STEM labs look like. Now, they may have been shown, but I don't remember seeing those.
Oh, every one of them's different. Oh, you mean that, well, yeah, every one of them's different. You're talking about the high schools.
Beyond just seeing what the STEM labs look like, what's
Bond issue update.
bond issue update, but what's going on with the teaching and the outcomes for the kids and that type of thing. What's actually happening in the STEM lab. So when we're asked out in the public, what's the money being used for, we can adequately respond to that in a positive way.
It does fall under the topics for presentation, a lot of the stuff we've just talked about.
Right.
The title of that, timing of district calendar, is a little deceiving. I expected to look at that and see how the calendar start and ending dates was developed, but that's really boring. If you just need to know, just go ask Katie Rebelli, I would think. She's definitely on top of that.
It's it's ironic, the timing of the setting of the timing of the calendar. How do they come up with when does the school year start, and what are holidays and what are teacher break days? And I think they sit around one day and they just go, let's do it like that, and they bring it to us. No, we know that it's a many weeks long, and it's lots of things conflict, and you're always trying to narrowly guide your path through all these obstacles. But it'd probably be worth as another topic to come in again when we're not in the midst of approving a calendar, but rather come in and say we're at this point in the calendar development and this is where we are. I think that would be a helpful thing. Again, a lot of board members, you get asked those questions a lot. And the biggest one is always, why are you starting before Labor Day? And that's always spit out like an accusation. But by the time you tell them the reasons, they kind of go, oh, okay. But again, the board needs to
It's about
understand those.
understanding the process.
Right. Yeah, exactly right. So no, that'd be another topic to try and schedule.
That'd be a good one, yeah.
Yeah, what's the process of developing the school year calendar? I think that would be a helpful one as well.
I agree with that because during the summer months when I've been out and about, and especially with my daughter and her kids and their friends, I get that question all
I was gonna say, I don't know how many
the
times I've been
time.
asked that this summer. I've lost track.
I know.
Tell them Katie said so.
That's
Oh,
what I
That's
say.
exactly what I'm gonna
That's the
use
answer.
now.
I don't know why.
I'll
Okay,
give him your number.
give him a cell phone.
You can tell them that Francis House started today.
Are you serious? Oh
Wow.
my gosh.
Oh, you get,
No, by the way, that said in jest, do not do that. I mean, that's always a temptation to say some other district is doing something. Let's talk about what we're doing. No.
and the other question is, why do they get more days off at Christmas than we, or the winter break than we do? Blah, 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 blah. I mean,
Right, and that all falls into that same calendar discussion of,
I know. And
of,
I-
you know, that the state has a mandated number of hours in the classroom, and districts are at leisure to move those around somewhat, but the total has to stay the same. So it's a matter of priorities.
Just a reminder too, we did that, when that does come to you, we discuss all that when the calendar is approved.
Oh,
and walk through
I know,
that.
and I know, I'm knowledgeable of the process and how difficult it is, and I've looked at all, I've had experience looking at 22 districts, and so I know it's pretty much the same, but our patrons don't know that, and so, and our
la-
staff.
Yeah. Last one under the district calendar, the superintendent review process. This is dictated to us by the state. We are dictated to follow the key performance indicators, KPIs, that are in there. We don't have to follow the exact process, but the closer we follow that process, the more defendable. And the process has been developed over a long time. It is a reliable process, so it's good to do. There's a calendar for that as well, and I think the next milestone is that in August we would get together and talk about what those goals are that we set at the review period, how we're doing on those, and kind of talk about what this is an informal process where we sit down and we talk about what expectations and what our wishes for the superintendent are for the next year. And we're getting pretty close to that. So as this is a review of an individual, we would do that in closed session. But any goals or anything that come out of that would be printed publicly for everyone to see. But those are something we need to do. And then, of course, we, again, by state statute, we have to have a review of the superintendent, and then before the NA meeting in February, we have to decide what to do the superintendent's contract, whether to renew it for another year. You know, always it's that floating 3 years. That's the form of employment security that's afforded to a superintendent, or not, and tell them that, you know, the superintendent, that you've got 2 years to go. That does not forbid the board, if they feel that a superintendent is failing in some substantial way, of doing something disciplinary about that. Now, I'm not in any way implying that that's the case, but these are the options open to the board. If you get to the point where you just say it's time not to renew that contract, that's a pretty strong signal to the superintendent that you're not happy with that performance. So when we're required in February to do that review, last couple of years we've done that by practice in the district. Again, this is one of those, we don't have to do it this way, but by practice, the idea has been that the president of the board and the superintendent work together pretty closely, and generally there's a friendship there. So trying to take it one step away from that, we allow the vice president of the board to run that review process, and it seems to be a pretty good way of putting together the goals from last year, performance. All of the board members have an opportunity to go through each of those goals and anything else they want to relate to the superintendent on. Here's what we like, here's what could be done a little better. I can tell you in the last couple of years, it's been a pretty positive experience for everybody. And then you decide whether or not to renew it for a third year. And then you can, but you don't have to at that time, set the dollar amount for the superintendent's salary for the following year. When practice the last couple of years, what we've done is we've waited until all the other groups are done, you know, to kind of see where things have been. And, you know, instead of putting the superintendent first, we've kind of moved him to the back so that everybody else knows what theirs is first, and then we take care of that. Certainly it has to be done by June so that we can get the next year in. But at that point, since February, he already knows that whether the renewal or not is going to happen and what that's going to be. Lisa, have I said anything incorrect in that? Great, thanks. Keep looking over. She's going to throw something if I get it wrong. But anyway, that's the process we go through. Some of that is a little bit up to us and to shape it in another way we want. What's absolute is that we have to base it upon the key performance indicators that are in the superintendent's guide from DESE. So we have to do that, and we've done more than just to base it on those indicators. We've tried to follow the timeline as closely as we can. And again, in a circumstance where you're trying to correct something that's going wrong, that's a lot more formal. In a circumstance where it's not, we still have to do all the right things, but specific dates aren't quite as written in stone, other than the renewal by February, so. If everybody's okay with that, we'll follow that procedure. We'll look together at the August timing sometime for the next meeting, what those goals are, and we'll kind of review those and make sure we still agree that those are on the right track. That's the next step according to the DESI guidance on superintendent review. Performance of the board. This one a little more in-looking, self-review and or surveys. We've done surveys in the past through the online survey things, and always, the board, when they talk about how do you like the administration of the district, and whether that's an 80 or 90 or whatever that number is, and how do you like this about the how do you like this about the district, when you come to how do you like the board, that number is always lower than almost any other number. And I would tell you that there's a couple of reasons for that. When you ran for the board, unless you were one of those nice people that got elected without opposition, somebody ran against you. And that person is not disposed, and that group of people are not disposed. So don't take that terribly to heart. Take much more to heart when somebody says, I think the board is doing this wrong. Look at that carefully. You know, when they say whether they like you or not, I don't know that has a whole lot of meaning, because it's an elected position, and you can only do what you can do. But if anybody says, we think this should be done better by the board, I would encourage us to take a cold, hard look at that. Should we really? Are we doing that right? So at this point, we could do a couple of things. We could, if we want to, do some kind of a self-review, get together in another meeting and say, what do we think? I tend to think that tonight's a little bit of that. You know, what are we doing? What do we want to do differently? Is there anything that we should do? We should certainly be listening through the COPE committees and through any kind of review that we get. If the community thinks we're not being enough of a communication, the trouble is that's a pendulum that goes back and forth, and you don't hear anything until it's gotten pretty bad. And at that point, you're late in the game. So I would encourage us to be ahead of that curve. That, you know, be reaching out to the community, be listening for, is there something that people feel they're not really getting? Or if you're getting a lot of questions about a specific thing, like why are we starting so early, maybe it's time for us to be more proactive about that. But whatever that is, so a self-review we could do, surveys we can do. I think all of those things have their place. And I guess I would throw it out now. Is there any questions or any preferences on how we would handle those kind of things? I would not shy away from, when we do a district-wide review online, include some questions about the board. But again, take that a little bit with a grain of salt, in that what somebody says about the board is more important than whether they like you or not. And so I would...
Let me ask you, oh,
Yeah,
excuse me.
go ahead.
So let me ask you, so is there a survey done annually that includes questions about the board?
I usually survey the public and internal folks about my performance and visionary aspects, and we usually always, I think we have all 3 of my years included some questioning. It's predominantly about superintendent, but we include some questioning about the board and performance of the board.
Are there enough questions to give us the kind of feedback that we need to know about our operations, though, and our perceptions?
That's,
Our perceived
I think we've discussed
perceptions.
that in the past. We've had some thought of, but I think the answer is yes. I don't know how,
Added more questions, I'm not sure they would answer them. You know, there's a limit of what people.
No, I understand that, but it's not how many questions, it's the quality of the questions that address our performance. And I don't want to muddy the water with leadership, with the board, but yet get to, if we could do it with one piece, I would rather see that
Sure.
than to do another survey.
yeah, and I
is
think
what I'm
that's the way we feel, because I wanted it to be, you know, customary in the district that the superintendent's always asking for feedback and input. So we do that. We've done that every year. We prepare it in December. We usually put it out in January and run it around the month. Sometimes we've got it out before the break in December, but it makes sense for exactly what you just said, Tammy, to include the board in there, because they're already talking about the leadership and the direction of the district. So instead of, to Keith's point, because it's a pretty short few questions that really gets to the point, and
We can, 2 things. One, so we can parse out our role. The second point in doing them together is that it's a unified process of leadership. It's not just the superintendent, not just the board functioning, but we're a united front of operating for the good of the district. Well,
Writing the
having enough
questions together?
questions, no, having enough questions to
On the
parse
survey.
out our role.
On one survey. Okay.
Yeah, in one survey.
I thought I thinking in the past, we always got copy of the survey before to see if we had any questions to ask or any changes. I can't remember if that's right or not. I'll say it's right.
Cope.
I was-
Yeah.
yeah.
We've talked about it in COPE
Oh.
and, yeah.
It's good to have the new ones on the board since we did that survey, to take a look at the survey and offer input and
And then
stuff
we
like
get
that.
the feedback
Yeah.
from that survey. Is that correct, Eric?
Yes.
I'm going to comment on what Matt said. I think any question should be well-crafted so it does give us actionable information as opposed to, how do you think the board's doing? Well, if.
Like the board.
do
That's
you
not,
like
a-
it?
that
Something
doesn't
like
tell
that.
us anything.
Right, so we need a question to
he
be
don't like.
one or two questions to be well-crafted so we can put it in some type of improvement plan for the board and we can, we can move forward. So Kathy?
I think, I mean, Kathy, and we have the help of Glenn, who's great at creating surveys, but if you're wanting to get into performance-like goals, then we need to know that from the board. The board needs to, I mean, Kathy, myself, and Glenn, and any of my other staff, we wouldn't want to suggest what the board wants to find out about their governance and where they want to go, so.
I think we probably need to have some more follow-up conversations about
Yeah.
that.
The next item is review of the norms of behavior. Everybody got a copy of the review of the ethics statement used every year, and we go through when the new board members are sworn in, and we read through it line by line, which is not an unhealthy thing to do. I've highlighted just a few of those to kind of just remind us where we are. We can change the code of ethics. This is not dictated to us by statute, but it's one the board has used in the past, and it sums up pretty well the governance items which are dictated to us. And I don't want to read through all of these, but I want to kind of highlight some things that I highlighted. And one was that govern and control affairs of the district as provided by law. It is our obligation, and that's why some things that come up tonight are done without a pin. You have to follow the law. We have to make sure the district is operating, and it's somewhat as the oversight and governance committee for the district. It's our responsibility to make sure that we are governing according to the law, and so that's a big part of what we do. The next one down is the fourth one is management and fiscal control. Again, it's our job to look at it to make sure that we're living within our means in the district, that we're getting the best use of the public's dollar. And so it falls on the board to review that. Again, we're not going through every budgetary item, but it's our job to question the budget, our job to look at it and say, is that really the best use of public funds? And so that, again, that falls on us. That's our job. A lot of things are important in between. I don't mean to say that they're not, but I'm going to skip down to the ones that really stood out. And one is the first one on the next one, is your job to make sure the schools are properly administered, but not to administer them. Our job, again, is oversight. Make sure that the management of the district is being done properly, that we're handling the way the schools are run, we're handling the discipline. We're not doing it ourselves. It is not our job to go in and find out what happened with a certain teacher and to investigate. It's not our job to go in there and say what's going on with this lunch menu. It's our job to oversee that, to make sure that it is being done. And the last thing I want to do is go check out a school menu, so.
That was a concern a few years ago.
Yeah,
I remember that.
and then we do bring them up that there were people and lots of different board members come in. And so it jumps down to the next one, number 9 down there. Realize your responsibilities are district-wide. Almost all of us came from a specific school. Almost all of us had kids in, or we live in a specific, you have to live in the district, so you live in a specific, one of the 4 quadrants, and even more specifically, one of the middle and one of the elementary schools. And so I would tell you that my heart goes out to the Eureka quadrant because both of my sons came all the way through. But your responsibilities to the whole district, and so it's good to remember once again that your responsibilities lie district-wide, not just for the schools that you may have a more affinity for. And last one I highlighted was the very last one on there, ethical, open, and above board. Hopefully that goes without saying, but again, we're administering public funds. We're doing what's right for the district. We're making sure that the public is getting informed about what they need. And in the end, do everything you can to be those 3 things, be ethical, open, and above board. In the end, if you're doing that and somebody still comes back and they're unhappy, you'll know that you've done the right thing. And again, always do the right thing. So in the code of ethics, those are the ones that really kind of jumped out at me that I wanted to kind of bring up. If there's something that somebody looks through that code of ethics and says, that's just a little too cheesy to read out loud, then we can change those things. I don't think we've made a change to the code of ethics in my memory So it's been quite some time. It's kind of served well, but at least once a year, let's bring it up again when we get new board members. And I thought tonight, since we're going through those things, that we just kind of bring them up rather than just read through them, but encourage everybody to kind of read through them again, understand where we are, what our point in life as far as board members is, and where we're going forward. So the visiting schools. Again, this is something that in the past, I don't think it's an issue now. As Dr. Cano said, on the first day or so of school, please visit out there and visit schools. Get into as many as you can. Stop by the office. Don't just pop in, but stop by the office. They're happy to have board members. Everybody's trying to find their place, and it really does send a message that the board's interested. So if you can, on those first 2 days, especially that very first day, and I got to tell you, it's a lot of fun when the schools are just coming in, starting with the middle schools as the buses are coming in. If you're there at the door, the staff sees you, the students see you. Get a feeling for what's going on and what the school feels like, and it's worth doing. So to do that. Other than those 2 days, please don't just show up at a school. Those schools are being run. They don't necessarily know you by sight. They certainly know who the Board of Education is, but if you're going to go there, call, schedule an appointment. If there's a special, we get invitations a lot, and please, when you get an invitation, try and make it. Veterans Day has become a very big thing. There's a lot of assemblies and a lot of things like that. It's important to the schools, and it's important to us as a board to get into that school, not just know that there's an elementary school over at this address, but get a feeling for what that school is, how it's run, who the personnel, who the staff and the kids in that school are. Again, but if you just show up unannounced, and sometimes, and again, it hasn't happened so much with this board, but it can happen, where somebody kind of shows up kind of wearing their sheriff's badge of, I'm a board member. Please try not to project that. Please try not to be that. Be there, see the schools. And if you see something and your reaction is, oh my gosh, how can that be? You take that back to Eric.
Matt, having said that, when we're looking at the school events for August and September that we got from Janet,
Right.
then you're suggesting like if we were going to go to any of these, that we would then call the schools?
Yeah,
Except for the opening day.
Right, that's an invitation,
Okay.
but please call them and let them know you'd like to come,
Okay.
and they'll be happy to hear from you. But on the opening day, if you can just show up, I think they'd be happy to see you. Those couple of days, just because there's so many coming and going, and we're trying to get everything put together for the school year. And I tell you, it's a pretty exciting time. It's certainly not drudgery. You'll be happy you did it. And especially if you can get into one of the most fun classes, if you can get into an elementary school on the very first day of school where moms and dads are dropping off the kindergartners, that's a particularly bittersweet moment, and we've probably all been there as parents. You kind of see it, so don't miss that one. That one's a lot of fun.
You have to do more soothing to the parents than to the kids.
Right, the kids are fine. It's the parents you have to say, it's going to be okay. Interaction with district personnel, it's the same kind of conversation. If you have a specific question about something that's in a specific person's, and it's a factual answer, feel free to call that person and just say, what's the answer to this? And you'll get a factual answer. If you're calling to find out, boy, why did we decide to do that? Please take that through the superintendent. Again, you're not the sheriff, you're a board member, it's oversight. So if you have any question about why, what is something the way it is, or what is the date for something, or when do we have to do this, I'm sure Eric doesn't mind if you call and ask the right person, what is that? But if you're calling to kind of affect or sort of investigate or something like that, please do that through the school district. Let the school district administer it the way it is. In the end, the board has the oversight and the ability to affect those decisions, but you undermine the district if you don't kind of go through the right channels. If it's something that needs correcting, if it's something that just needs an answer, feel free. Involvement in school board elections. Again, this is happening in the last 2 or 3 years. This hasn't really been an issue. Understand that if somebody's running for the board and you're out there campaigning for them and saying what a wonderful person that is and what a terrible person another candidate might be, you might have to work with that other candidate. Be a little bit careful about that and be a little bit above that. You still, as a citizen, have a right to advocate for anybody you wish. You have a right to put your opinions out there and have them heard. Understand that in the end, the board that gets elected has to be able to govern as a coherent body. So be a little bit careful about that. And generally, when in the past years, if anybody's come to me running for the board, I sit down with all the candidates, and I don't try and be judicious about who I'll talk to talk about the process and how it goes. And I encourage them, call the other board members and so if you get a call, be open and giving about what your experience is. How does it work? What have you seen? But try not to be too directly and be very aware that if 4 board members get together at a campaign for somebody and they're talking about what's going on in the district, you just held an unannounced board meeting. Don't do that. Now, if you're all in attendance and you're there just listening to something, you can do that. You can do that. But again, if it's a discussion, if you're going on problems, if you're talking about district business, and there's 4 of you there, you just held a board meeting. So be wary of that. All the things come up in every board election. People get out signs and they pop up like mushrooms exactly 2 weeks to the day before the election, and they're just everywhere. Undoubtedly, some people get upset with that. They'll call, they'll say, so please be aware you can't put the signs on public grounds. You can't put them in, on intersections, things like that. People do that all the time. And a lot of times it's not even the candidate, it's somebody doing it for them. So if you're giving advice to another board member, or if you're running for another term on the board, it's always better to be much more above the fray on that. There's some do's and don'ts, and I know that as we get closer to that election, we'll have another update, and Kathy did a great job last year about here's what the district can do, here's what you can do. Again, you don't check your rights at the door when you join the board, but be careful what you do. Sometimes those come back around to make you wish you had handled that a little more graciously. So enough on that. CSIP, goal number 5, then there's a copy of it in there. The CSIP is published every year. We have to do an update to it. And this is governance. This is why we have a board, and those 6 reasons: the annual budget, the professional development plan, superintendent evaluation, district policies and regulation, board meeting agendas, and the CSIP, ironically enough, are the things those are the reasons that we're here. Phil talked about objective 2 and 3, to monitor, and ensure adherence to ethical practices, and then to implement a communications plan. I think those are the very things that we've been talking about tonight. I just wanted to bring that up in terms of what we do. A lot of the things we do because they're the right things, the things that we have an idea of, and through practice and long existence of the board, those are the things that have served the board well. But these are the things that are actually required of us by the state. So hopefully what we do and the decisions we make are in following those pretty cleanly, and that we're not running astray of anything. But the things we've talked about here with the code of ethics and the other things that we do in the meetings in the COPE committee are things that are within our jurisdiction or our leeway on how we're going to do them. So,
If I can
Yeah,
interject, Matt, just a number of years back when the state started prescribing these 5 goals, and the 5th one being governance, there was a lot of confusion from boards about what does that mean? What do we need to do beyond what we're doing? And the clarification came that, no, that's the governance piece is what you do, and that should be your measurement or your barometer to know that you're doing all the right things in your governance of the board. So it's kind of a check and balance, if you will, not so much for this goal, what do we do beyond what we do we just need to make sure that what is done in the existence of the board fits in that governance goal. It was confusing to people a number of years back when it came out, because boards were wondering what in addition they needed to do.
What's that mean to me?
It's what you do, and it's making sure that there's a barometer for that.
Current objectives? Current objectives?
Those are prescribed.
those are prescribed. Those are according to the CSIP. That's the barometer you can use for, if you start thinking about the things that the board does, do they fit well within those things? Those are the things that we're here for. And if you find that we're doing something that really isn't included in there, well, we ought to think about whether we should be doing that, or if we're not meeting all of those specific things. And I think we are, and I'm kind of reviewed, and that's why I stuck that in there tonight, to look at it and see, are we really covering all those bases? And so if you look at that and think that you think maybe we're not, it's time to bring that up. That any board member can bring up any of those things.
I think what we talked about, gathering some information from the survey and going to the town hall meetings and things kind of play into number 3 on here, the 3, objective 3, objective 3, strategy 3. So as we gather some more data, maybe we can have a little bit of a measure on how we're doing on the strategies.
Yeah.
In the I don't think it was true. Was or do we modify it?
You have to keep that. Everything that's there
Is for
in
5
this
years.
governance is prescribed by the state. You can add to this, but you can't take away from it.
If we look at some of the things that are going on, and again, I'll go back to number 3, the app that we have would talk about that's an opportunity to gather perceptions, viewpoints, the survey, being at town hall meetings,
Patron Comments, but
patron comments. We actually go to the president, some of us go to the
The
president's
broadcasting
forum.
of this?
So if we would actually start breaking these down, I think we feel pretty good about how we're addressing these strategies under objective 3.
Hopefully we are, and that's the point. The The one caution I would give to that is that, as I said, we haven't gotten a comment through the app in about a year. We don't get very many comments at board meetings, and some of that might mean that things are going pretty well. You know, people generally speak up when they're unhappy, not when they're happy. So maybe that's it, but I would encourage us not to be too complacent with that. As I said, generally people don't say anything until they're really upset. So kind of an ear to the ground and an opportunity, and kind of broadcast it out again. If you want to talk to a board member about anything, or to the whole board about anything, please come forward. I want to believe, and I do believe, that things are running pretty well in the district. We're in a good time, and it's a time where things are coming together nicely in our facilities and our achievements. But I don't want to discount the possibility that if there's something out there, I want to know about it before it gets, and I don't know of anything, but if it were to be out there, I would like to know about it before it gets really bad. So I just encourage us to remain vigilant about, listen.
I think there's a, I mean, the way I operate and always have as superintendent, there's a function of the superintendent in that. And if I'm doing my job, and if I am accessible and open to the community and to parents and to staff, then because I'd like to say those calls never come, but they do. They come quite often. But I think it's my job to do my best to resolve those things so people don't feel they need to go to the level of governance, that they feel that they have. So that's a barometer that I use, that your phone as president doesn't ring off the hook. And you all get the occasional things, but I think I think there's a correlation to the superintendent's performance in there as well.
And then the eighth one that I wrote on mine that wasn't on yours is this annual review. Do we want to try and change anything about that? We've kind of gone through all the things about what we do, and this is a little different than approving a budget or something, but rather how we go about doing business. Every year we try and do this, and every year we say we'll do it as close to the elections as we can, but by the time the elections are over, a few weeks later, you're talking about graduation, and then you're talking about summer breaks. We do this about once a year, and we go through it, and I think we've kind of, again, narrowed it down into a process that we're comfortable with, and to a list of subjects that we're comfortable with. But certainly we could do this more than once a year if we wanted to, if we felt it necessary. We don't have to. And if there's anything else we wanted to add to this, if anybody gets the feeling that, well, you barely even skimmed over whatever that might be, again, we're completely open to what those things are and what that might be, and would publicly bring it up as I am now, that if there's something else to be talked about, we need to know about it. And we can schedule this meeting, and I think it is healthy at least once a year to do this, but it could be more often if we wanted it to be. All right, any other discussion on the board practices and procedures? I think that some pretty healthy stuff, and I think we got some good topics out of it we want to hear in the near future, and go for some of those. All right, the last thing on the agenda is the future agenda presentations and events to attend. We came up with 2 or 3 ideas for agenda presentation. I think you all have a whole list of them here out through the end of September. Lots of stuff going on for the beginning of school, the first day of school, and then many, many events. There's all kinds of fall things up and through, and this whole thing goes through October, but Veterans Day in November has become a big deal. Again, if anything is going on at any school, you can look at their school calendar and see what that is. If it's something you'd like to attend, please call them, and they'd love to have you, whether it's during the day or in the evening. But all of those, I guess, the next time we meet will be 2 weeks, and that'll be the day after school starts. So fasten your seatbelts. All right, thanks everybody for coming tonight. It's 7:30, so it's not so late. It just feels like it because we didn't have we got started earlier. Any other discussion tonight? Anything else to bring up? Then thank you, and we will adjourn.
Good job, Matt.
All right.
You too. Just picked all my nails off. I know, right? That's what That's right.
The thermometer must be falling or something.
But
Yeah,
I
that
tried
front's gonna
getting
be
in.
Yeah.
Here about 9 or
See, I went to